Hello, everyone. I'm Amy Antonucci, a board member for New Hampshire Peace Action. Glad to welcome you to tonight's special event, These Times Through the Eyes of a Veteran for Peace, featuring New Hampshire Peace Action Director, Will Hopkins. Let's begin the evening by acknowledging that we do our work here in New Hampshire on Nidakana, the traditional ancestral homeland of the Abenaki, Pennacook, and Wabanaki people, past and present. We honor with gratitude the land and waterways and Alnobak people who have been stewarding throughout the generations. A really quick word on Zoom etiquette. We love it if you keep your video on, but we do ask that you keep your audio muted for now and start off using the chat for your questions. I'm sure that we'll get to a point where we take hands, but that'll be a little bit later on after Will talks. So tonight's event grew out of the frightening and much, if not well-reported situation that erupted in Ukraine this winter. What many of us found is that the room for nuanced conversation and alternate views was really small. Even those of us who have been focused for years on foreign policy issues found our perspectives unwelcome. And within the peace movement, there is also a lot of disagreement about how to think about and approach the situation. So tonight, we wanted to make a little bit of space for a particular view that we don't feel has been heard enough, a US veteran for peace. Will Hopkins served for 6 years in the New Hampshire National Guard, including a year-long tour in Iraq as an infantryman, which included the fall 2004 Fallujah offensive. That experience eventually led him to peace activism and to us here at New Hampshire Peace Action. Will intends to give us an overview of current events, including but going beyond Ukraine, and to talk about what he sees us as, what we might do next to further the cause of peace over the summer and beyond. He likes to think of tonight as his summer peace assignments program. In case you don't know, Will is actually going on sabbatical for 3 months, starting tomorrow. So I'm very grateful that he made the time to organize his thoughts and join us tonight. So please join me in welcoming Will.
Thank you all so much, and thank you, Amy. It's good to be with you, and kind of a farewell for now moment. I'm wanted to kind of start my talk, and I'm sorry if I look over to the left, I'm actually looking at you all. I've got your faces over there so that my notes are in front of me. But I wanted to kind of start, go back almost 13 years to September of 2009, when I took over as director of New Hampshire Peace Action. So I'd been back from Iraq for 4 years, so not very long at all at that point. And I was coming out of probably 4 or 5 months working for the Democratic Party's coordinated campaign. So most of I actually finished working for Peace Action specifically on Carol Shea Porter's campaign, but before that I'd been working primarily for Jeanne Shaheen. And it's important to note that that was 2008, so we're talking about the Iraq War is still very active, and the stakes were essentially if we were going to escalate and continue to try to occupy Iraq or get out. And in that moment, I felt some reasonable clarity that the Democrats were our best bet for getting out of Iraq. So I very shortly after the election season, I joined the board of New Hampshire Peace Action and was on the board for about a year before taking over as director. Um, and at that point, the peace movement nationally, and to some extent here in New Hampshire, was like a beach ball with a pinhole in it. It had been quite robust at the height of the Iraq War, but in particular after Barack Obama was elected, there was a deflation. And our membership was already in decline when I came on as director. Pretty much every other rural chapter of peace action around the country that didn't have a major city. So Newark survived, and Los Angeles survived, and New York and Boston, and Chicago area peace action survived. But without a major metropolitan area, there weren't any chapters other than New Hampshire that managed to keep paid staff through the Obama years. And I, I think in my first days, I definitely had clarity that it was about ending war with Iraq, ending war with Afghanistan, and so those first two goals, I guess, I've acquired. Like we've gotten there. Those two things have happened, which is good. But a couple months ago, I was talking to Olivia Zink, who runs Open Democracy, and Olivia posed the question because she feels like her issues, money in politics and corporate control of the political process, have gotten worse during this period. And she asked me if I felt the same way about the issues we work on. And I think in a lot of ways they have gotten worse. The military budget has continued to grow at a more rapid rate than the rest of the budget. So it's continued to grow as far as a percentage of the federal budget. We have a system which depends on Pentagon contracts to create jobs, and that's a bipartisan system. It's something that the Democratic Party is as much bought into as the Republicans. You bring jobs home by finding Pentagon contracts that can make jobs in your district. Jeanne Shaheen, during that period, since I worked on her original election campaign to the U.S. Senate, I feel like is worth mentioning, has been on Senate Foreign Relations, is now one of the most senior and important senators on Senate Foreign Relations. She's also on Appropriations, which makes her double important. And I would say that Senator Shaheen has been, she's very, very well funded by Pentagon contractors, and she's not a peace senator. It's not what she does. Generally, she is on a voting block with Senator Risch, who's a fairly militarist Republican, and that voting block kind of controls what could be called the center. I don't think that it's anywhere near the center when it comes to the values of Americans, but it's the center of Senate politics, which include a kind of a widespread buying into military Keynesianism as a primary economic driver. There have been times where she's been great, but generally, I would say Senator Shaheen does what's best for the industry that profits from war making, and she's been an important part of selling the positions that are profitable to the Democratic Party. So under Obama, we saw the new Cold War starting. We saw a beginning of messaging around Russia that was very demonizing. And we saw huge investments in nuclear war again, and nuclear weapons. It's a $1.7 trillion planned revamping of all of our nuclear weapons and delivery vehicles that began under President Obama, continued through President Trump, and is continuing under President Biden. So we had early on the Syria conflict, and in our media, you would see that we were fighting ISIS while also fighting Assad. that Russia was supplying chemical weapons to Assad that Assad was using. And of course, these things, that there were chemical attacks in Syria, but something that General Petraeus had to say as Secretary of Defense was that there was no evidence linking that to either Russia or to Assad, those chemical attacks. And that was something that was largely made up by the media. And then, then we had President Trump and the Trump years, during which our media was very focused on Russiagate, this idea that Russia had hacked the American elections. And I think some of that, there was an understanding among Democrats on Capitol Hill in particular that Russiagate was something that could be done to make sure that Trump's agenda didn't move forward, that there was something else going on that maintained focus. In the end, at one point, I was bought in enough that I shared over Peace Action channels some materials suggesting that Russiagate was something that should be taken very seriously. But in the end, what we saw was, I think they came up with about $48,000 worth of Facebook ads that came from Russian IP addresses that were suspected to be coming from the Kremlin. So an impact in an election where literally hundreds of millions of dollars were spent by the industries that profit from war making and death, hundreds of millions. We're talking about the salary of an elementary school paraprofessional worth of Russian interference that was a huge area of focus for 4 years. And that's it's not to say that it's okay, or even that it was a bad strategy to be focusing the Senate and House during a time when it was Republican controlled and President Trump was likely to engage in some pretty damaging stuff. Keeping the focus on something that wasn't harmful in the same ways maybe was a good strategy. But it's interesting how there's been this drumbeat of, we can't trust Russia, we can't work with Russia. Russia is I mean, there's been a very intentional demonization over the last 10 years or so. During that time, the most influential person in the State Department in that part of Europe and Asia has been Victoria Nuland. Her husband, her brothers, most of her family are engaged either in pro-militarist think tanks or on the boards and as executives in the war making industry. And Victoria Nuland has been very well known to try to find ways to heighten tensions. And we've sent out lots and lots of emails over the years as she's repeatedly been nominated to run the State Department in Eastern Europe, saying that she's a really dangerous figure. And so we've also we've had, I don't know how many speakers, probably at least one a year. So, maybe a dozen, 2 dozen speakers on US-Russian relations. And they've mostly said the same sorts of things. And these are folks, former State Department, former Department of Defense, former military. We didn't host, but at one point I went to a webinar with a former Russian general who was a professor at the Russian Military Academy. Colin Powell's chief of staff, Larry Wilkerson, was one of our speakers, and I got to have lunch with Larry a couple times. And there were a few common themes, and one was that the expansion of NATO towards Russia was inherently something that was leading us towards a conflict with Russia. That NATO's continued expansion east was a security threat. That once you get east of the mountain ranges that protect Moscow, Russia has limited ability to defend itself because it's all one wide open plain. And the idea that a hostile military alliance would be stationed east of those mountain ranges was threatening. And it's something that we've, for those of us who have been following this for a long time, this has been part of what we've been saying, that this is a really dangerous situation and one that is provocative for Russia, which is not to say that any of it's okay. That Putin had any right, or that this is anything but a war crime. It's just to say that we have for years been saying, hey, this is really dangerous. We're creating a situation here that could lead to serious war. So I didn't think Putin was going to attack Ukraine when he did. I thought, what I was seeing was brinksmanship on the part of the U.S., and I assumed that they actually knew what they were doing, that they knew how far they could push it, and how much money they could make building weapons to support NATO near Russia, and get away with it. And I thought that that they weren't going to push it far enough that this was going to happen. But Putin moved early and aggressively, and attacked Ukraine. So it's still on Putin. This is still criminal. But I do want to say that the peace movement has been trying to avert this situation for a long time, and so have a number of folks. Larry Wilkerson, former Secretary of Defense, William Perry, has since 2014 talked about how dangerous it was to fund and back the coup in Ukraine, how dangerous it was to be funding the Azov battalion, Nazis, out there. And it's interesting that when you hear on public radio, they say the Azov battalion alleged Nazis. It's interesting because there seems to be broad agreement at this point that Russia and Putin are Nazis. Everybody, I've heard this from a number of different sources. The Azov battalion, however, get the language alleged Nazis when they're the ones alleging. Like the Azov battalion are wearing swastikas and Nazi memorabilia and draw their lineage there. They're the ones saying we're Nazis. So, which is all to say, like up until February, this was all stuff I could talk about and feel comfortable talking about, because it was all the truth of the matter. And when I say that stuff now, even in this group, I suspect there's some of you who are roiling with rage, and I don't know if that's true, but I know that that's been the reaction when any of these things get said in public. That NATO expansion was provocative here, that that a hostile military alliance east of the mountain ranges that protect Russia was an unacceptable security condition, that the US was not serious about, as far as negotiations about Russian security. The US did not take Russian security needs seriously, was not willing to negotiate or provide security guarantees to Russia. And that was all stuff that we were saying up until February, and that we can't say now. This is the first time I've spoken it to this level publicly, because I've been really, really careful. And the level of rage that people have has been, I'll get to that at the end, the level of rage people have. But which is all to say, in doing this work, we can't say that right now. We can't talk about these realities that we were talking about up until Putin invaded Ukraine. And that makes this part of the work really hard. So I also want to say that one of the things that Secretary of Defense William Perry said in the lead up to this, and this was all the way back when Obama was still president, Bill Perry said that we are in greater danger of a nuclear war right now than we were at any point during the Cold War. And he's continued to hold that is true through the Trump years up until now, and that it is really over this security situation for Russia, where Russia, a country that has been invaded at least once a century for the last several centuries by European nations, coming in from the West, that is a security situation that can only end in conflict, and a conflict that Russia does not have the conventional forces to win, but does have the nuclear forces to be. I mean, I don't know what, you can't win a nuclear war, but does have more nuclear weapons than we do. Um, so, so what I wanted to say is, for 6 years, or maybe 8 years even, the peace movement has been trying to avert this crisis. And saying the things that we've been saying for 8 years at this point really upset people, because it suggests that we could have stopped it. And that being said, this is still on Putin. This is still on the oligarchs in Russia. This is still on the folks who are executing a war which is illegal. All wars are immoral and unethical and wrong. And there was another way. And certainly, none of what I'm saying is to defend Russia. That's not. It's just to say that at this point, if we want that conflict to end, it has to end through negotiations. Right? There needs to be a treaty that allows Russia to pull out of Ukraine. That's how this ends. Some sort of agreement, and that agreement needs to recognize that Russia is worried about its own security because a hostile military alliance has grown up to its borders. We've got. Okay, well, I'll get to that afterwards, Fern. I'm seeing the comment. Just wanted to make sure it wasn't something urgent. We'll get to that in Q&A after. So there is a serious danger of nuclear war. We don't know what that is, and we can all guess. I think that that it hasn't happened yet means that there's a good chance we'll get through this without a nuclear war. I've been really disappointed in our media, in particular MSNBC and the New York Times. I have seen them as pro-war propaganda for years, but I've seen that really ramp up in this. They've been, really intentionally misleading, in my opinion. We've seen all of the Democrats supporting sending more weapons into this situation as the only solution. The entire Democratic Party, and that's some of my heroes, Ro Khanna, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, some of the people who I think are the very best of what Washington. And it's not to say that Washington has any of the best of humanity, but the best of what Washington has to offer to us. And I'm sorry if I keep looking to my left. That's where all your faces are. I'm looking at my notes in front of me. I've also thought it's been really interesting, the calls. There's been a consistent call from many nations that Putin be arrested as a war criminal and tried, and I think that is what needs to happen. And I think that for Americans to say that while George Bush and Donald Rumsfeld are free is pretty hypocritical. That we need to be focused on cleaning up our own house. And I'm going to talk more about that in a little bit too. Finally, the centering of Ukraine as in our media and in the public psyche, while an equally deadly war has been waged for years in Yemen using U.S. weapons and employing weaponized cholera and starvation, which has killed. Even during the Ukraine war, Yemen's death count has consistently been higher. It's been the largest humanitarian crisis on Earth for at least 8 years. So all to say, we should be condemning Putin. We should be condemning the invasion, and we should focus our energy on finding ways for the U.S. to abandon the new Cold War, give Russia security concessions in exchange for a complete withdrawal from Ukraine. It's the fastest way to save the most lives, right? We figure out what it is Russia needs to stop doing what they're doing, and we help make the space in the American dialogue for that to happen. That being said, it's been absolute hostility to try to talk about how we make that space from so many different directions. right now, people who don't seem to be getting the same reaction that we get when we do that. Pat Buchanan wrote an article that was widely circulated, saying a lot of what I've said. And I think folks on the right aren't getting the same criticism. I'm not sure exactly why. But also a lot of military experts just saying Russia can't defend itself if there's a serious military alliance stationed east of the Ural Mountains. And serious conservative military experts seem to be able to say some of these things without getting their heads bitten off. But peace activists don't seem to. My national gave all of the chapters of peace action around the country the advice not to say the kind of things I'm saying today, but specifically not to talk about Ukraine and compare it to Iraq. And I feel like I just have to, because I was there, because I saw the children in Iraq, and I know that they're the same as the children in Ukraine, and I know that what we did is the same thing. That putting war, that when you bring war to a people, that all children are innocent, and that when you and that people die, people bear the brunt of wars, not the politicians who start them, and children suffer the most. And we we need to be, I really hope that when this all ends, we make the space for Putin to be arrested and tried for war crimes, and we do it by showing leadership and trying our own war criminals, because the war I was a part of was no less bloody and no less evil than this war is, and no less unprovoked either. Iraq did not pose a threat to us any more than Ukraine posed a threat to Russia. So I think that's kind of the hard things that I've wanted to say about Ukraine, but didn't really have the guts to say. That now that I'm going on sabbatical, I can put out there. What Russia is doing is wrong, and it's ugly, and I think it's the same as what we did in Iraq in a lot of ways. Pretending that there was some sort of threat to our interests in order to project power, control resources, control pipelines and the flow of resources. And it's the same thing Russia's doing. And I also think that there's, we talk about military Keynesianism as it applies to American policy in the region over the last few years. I think that Russian policy might be largely shaped by the Russian war industry and the jobs and the profit that can be made there. I talked a little bit about Yemen. So, largest humanitarian crisis on earth. We can't get international aid workers in. There is an engineered cholera epidemic that is, as a result, there is a ceasefire right now, which is a lot to celebrate. It could be as many as 250,000 deaths a year. We know that at least 400,000 have died, primarily from starvation and cholera due to the blockade. We're in the position, back in February of 2021, Joe Biden announced that the US would no longer support the Saudi-led offensive in Yemen, that we were going to withdraw our support. And we didn't do a lot of work on Yemen that year because we understood that it was over. And that fall, when the National Defense Authorization Act was passed, all of the funding and weapon sales to Saudi Arabia and United Arab Emirates were put back in. And that, as I understand it, is part of something called a Four Corners Agreement, where a senior member of House Foreign Relations and Senate Foreign Relations from both parties sit down and decide what would be acceptable in the National Defense Authorization Act to both parties, and come to agreements about what each party is willing to give up. And even with those provisions, Joe Biden signed that National Defense Authorization Act, and we went back to business as usual, supporting the Saudi-led offensive. So at this point, there's a push this is the part of my talk that is summer peace assignments. At this point, there is a push to pass a Yemen War Powers resolution, which would explicitly limit the ways that the US can participate. Right now, we're doing air refueling of Saudi bombers and fighters. We're doing intelligence support, satellite support, and we're selling almost all the weapons to Saudi Arabia that are needed to do this, and United Arab Emirates. One of the things that we're selling, this is, it seems like a really minor thing, replacement tires for the F-15s. It's this one thing that if we stop doing it, an F-15 needs a new set of tires every time it takes off. It goes through a tire every time it goes. Understand that most Pentagon weapon systems are designed specifically to be expensive, to have a continual flow of money, which makes jobs in congressional districts as part of the strategy and marketing of our weapon systems, to make sure that things are pricey, and that priciness both rewards CEOs of military contracting companies and also create jobs in every congressional district that maintain and win votes for representatives. That is a big part of how our government functions. But at this point, Chris Pappas is seen as one of the top House targets. I don't fully understand why, except that he is continually selected to be one of the conferees on the National Defense Authorization Act. He's not on House Foreign Relations, but for some reason he's seen as important. My understanding is that is specifically because a lot of the weapons that are being used in Saudi Arabia are made in the second congressional district of New Hampshire. So we have BAE, Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, Elbit. We have a number of contractors who have production facilities in Chris Pappas's, that is the first congressional district, in Chris Pappas's district. And that if Chris Pappas can be moved, they think that there are very good chances that the Yemen War Powers resolution can pass. So he's seen as one of the very most important people. And again, it's not exactly clear to me why that is, but I do trust that folks like the Friends Committee on National Legislation and National Peace Action do understand how these things are working on the Hill. And so next Tuesday at 6 p.m., there's going to be a call-in hour, and you'll note that today's email blast from Peace Action was asking for calls on the Yemen War Powers resolution. So making sure that that Chris Pappas, who was willing to co-sponsor a Yemen War Powers resolution when Donald Trump was president, and was willing to be very good on Yemen when Donald Trump was president, but less so when there's actually a chance that that money is going to stop flowing. It's really important that we are really making sure that Pappas hears. While that happens, we also need to be aware that the Senate's going to be the next hurdle, and that Jeanne Shaheen is arguably the most critical pivot point in the Senate because of that central voting bloc that she and Senator Risch, Senator of South Carolina, Senator Lindsey Graham, this is a crew of folks who all of them sometimes cross the aisle to go with the other one, but they tend to stick together. Graham, Risch, and Shaheen. So if Shaheen gets on board with something like this, it's got really good odds of being pushed through. And I do think that Jeanne Shaheen understands what's at stake, the number of lives at stake here, but also the number of jobs. So I think that's, when we look at Ukraine, we really have limited ability to stop that war. It would be if we could call Vladimir Putin and he cared what we said, we'd have some ability. If we could protest in the streets and it had some effect on Vladimir Putin, I'd be telling you to protest. There's not much we can do, but we can save kids in Yemen. And I think that that's a place that we can focus energy. I think focusing energy on Ukraine, making space for the U.S. to engage in meaningful diplomacy is a good thing. But don't say any of the things that I just said in that. Just say that we need to create an opportunity for there to be a diplomatic solution, and that means taking Russia's security needs seriously. And that's something that folks at the Pentagon are saying. It's something that lots of former defense officials and State Department officials are saying, that a negotiated agreement is the best way to end that war, and that the U.S. can play a positive role in it. I'm not going to go into Palestine much. The killing of Shireen Jarrad, the journalist, and the subsequent violence at her funeral. It's good after 12 years to see people starting to take the human rights situation in Israel-Palestine seriously. I definitely would encourage you to attend our programs on Israel and Palestine. I don't have a lot I want to say about it. Iran has been something that since 2004, there's been a drumbeat of Iran is developing nuclear weapons, and we should attack in order to get that situation under control. We had the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. It was a verifiable agreement. It was being followed by Iran. It definitely blocked the possibility of Iran getting a nuclear weapon. Trump pulled us out of it, which it's unclear to me. He refused to certify what the International Atomic Energy Agency said about Iran and their compliance. He refused to accept that it was true and sign off, which meant that our sanctions snapped back into place. And the Biden administration, ran saying they wanted back into the JCPOA, but saying it really gently. And the resulting negotiations were, the idea was that maybe now that Iran had felt the effects of more sanctions, we could get a better deal than the JCPOA, which really what had happened is a complete loss of trust, because an agreement had been reached. All of the European powers had agreed. All of the entire Security Council had agreed. The Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action was working, and Iran felt the effects of sanctions anyway. And that means a loss of trust. And so what we actually needed to get back into that probably would have been additional concessions from the US. But at the very least, we should have simply recertified and tried to get it reinstated as it was. But that's not what our diplomatic team decided to do. Those negotiations broke down. Iran is back under sanctions, and may actually, although there was a fatwa issued and they were not trying to develop nuclear weapons beforehand, they may now be doing that, in particular because they've seen how possession of nuclear weapons has gone with North Korea. That North Korea got nuclear weapons, and it has led to the U.S. kind of backing off a little bit from North Korea. And I think one of the few, even a broken clock is right twice a day, and I think one of the few things that President Trump got right, I think he got Syria quite right, and I think that he got the reality that he managed to get meetings with North Korea, with Kim Jong-un, is very positive. That we were able to actually have diplomatic relations with the last nuclear power to enter the nuclear scene. Being able to talk is a really, really powerful step in the right direction. The Biden administration has moved us back to strategic neglect, which isn't the worst possible situation. I think we should always be outspoken in opposing the war games. They're provocative. They are suggesting to North Korea that we might want to invade. But I think we also know that we're not going to, because North Korea has nuclear weapons. And I think that for a nation like Iran, that reality that the US isn't going to step on their toes is very attractive. So I think we have a real missed opportunity with Iran. I don't know what the next step is, how we get back to a place where we might close the nuclear door there. And then the last thing, and this is something that I hope we have some more programs on. We've talked about US-China relations, but the recent threats from Biden to go to war if China moves toward Taiwan, we've created a situation where there are a handful of nations that we've made sure don't feel like they can cooperate with us: China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, and that means that they're going to have to turn to each other. And Russia has not felt the effects of sanctions, specifically because there have been enough other countries for them to trade with, that they can be self-sufficient and sufficient with the trading partners they have. So our sanctions have been largely ineffective. So we're kind of, by choosing continually to fund militarism, war making, weapons manufacturing, and not engage in meaningful partnerships to make the world a better place with other nations, in particular those who threaten American military hegemony. We've made a really untenable situation, and it's mostly just sad. It's mostly just really, really depressing. So after 12 years at Peace Action, feeling very, very tired. It's really hard to work against a system that is so well defended, and does what it does so callously and with such good propaganda. The work is exhausting, and feeling like we're losing is exhausting. And I still believe that when Dr. King said that the moral arc of the universe is long, but it bends in the direction of justice, that he wasn't just saying that because it sounds good. I do think it's true, and I have a lot of hope with the upcoming generations. They're already changing the world in really radical ways. But I'm tired, and I'm really looking forward to taking a good long break. I am leaving you in very good hands. You'll have Doreen in the office. You've got Chris in the office. Amy is going to be leading our program work. You've got Bill Maddox, our treasurer, who is a force to be reckoned with. Chris Ann, Janet Zeller, Kurt, our board chair. Jeremy is chairing the C4 board and heading up a lot of our nuclear weapons work through his work at the Union of Concerned Scientists. Program's going to continue without me. What I hope to hear when I get back in September is that things actually worked better without me, that everything went smoother, that Pappas moved effortlessly on Yemen and co-sponsored the War Powers resolution, that that maybe I've just been clogging up the works here. That's what I'm hoping. In the short term, Yemen, I think, is really the place we can make a difference. The never-ending challenge of working to change our culture, working to change our system, a system that's built to protect itself from change. Like, that's the ongoing challenge that we face. We need to put some focus on the national culture of violence, glorifying violence, investing in violence, investing in weapons, investing in guns, letting those investments then come back and invest in our electoral process. I think that our work around anti-racism is critical. Acceptance, coexistence, fighting for the most vulnerable, affirming the worth and dignity of every person, exposing the cruelty of our system, especially its militarism. Our system economically depends on state-sanctioned mass murder as an economic pillar, and that is a pillar that we can destroy and we must destroy. It can't be part of the world we're moving into. So that's where I'm at. I wanted to share 3 bits of wisdom that I have heard people say in the last couple of months that have really helped me through this time with Ukraine. And 2 of the sources are on the call. The third, I don't remember who said it. I just remember how it hit me and how I've been holding it in my heart. And that this first idea is the one that I don't know who to attribute it to, and it's that it's good to be strategic. It's good to set goals strategically. It's good to pick targets strategically. But we shouldn't feel like it's only worthwhile if it works. We shouldn't be working to peace because we know that what we're doing is going to topple this system. We need to do it because we're ethical people and we're doing what's right. We're fighting for the innocent and we're fighting for children. The gauge of whether or not our work and our lives are worthwhile and valuable is not that we succeeded in defeating a system as powerful and as well defended as the one that we're working to undercut here. The gauge is that we did. The gauge of our worth is that we fought, that we worked as hard as we could to protect the children of humanity from the horrors of war. And I'm reminded of we used to, when a new board member came onto the board of New Hampshire Peace Action, we do a go around and we'd ask, what's your name? Where are you from? What was the first peace event you ever went to? And what was it about? And what is it that makes you want to fight? And John Lamperti would always answer the last question the same way. He'd say, my name's John Lamperti. I'm a math professor from Dartmouth. I've been at this since I think for John, it was, the 50s or something like that. And then he'd say, and I just can't stand to see the bastards getting away with it. And that's the thing. Like, don't do it because we're don't get discouraged because the military industrial complex continues to grow, because military spending it continues to expand. Just fight the bastards because you don't want to let them get away with it. Just keep working on it. And I do think that there are a lot of metrics that show that we've moved forward. The war in Iraq is not raging anymore. The war in Afghanistan has come to an end. The upcoming generation is not going to stand for this being the center pillar of our economy. So that's the first thing that was said. Like it's not about doing it because you're going to win. It's about doing it because it's right. The second is from the Reverend Faye Buttrick, who's on the call tonight. And this is something she said recently that really hit me hard. And she said, and I'm paraphrasing you here, Faye. Faye said, don't pray for tasks equal to your strength. Pray for strength equal to your tasks. Then, rather than depending on miracles to change the world, you will always be striving to become the miracle. And that, when Faye said that, it hit me in a way like that's the thing. Like we don't try to make it easier to do this work. Just pray for the strength to do the work right. And then the third is Amy, who's hosting tonight. Amy, in a board meeting, kind of summed up the challenge for the peace movement about the Russian invasion. She said the world is horrified to see the face of war. This is, again, I'm paraphrasing. Just horrified to see the face of war in a clear light as it's inflicted by Putin and the Russian oligarchs against white-skinned children. And our job as the peace movement is to help them continue to see that face clearly when it's brown children who are falling victim to our own government and our allies, and to help them care just as much about those children. And those are the three things that people have said to me recently that have helped me have the heart to do the work. So as we move forward in the discussion, I'm going to open it up now. I would like to ask, if you're willing, give your name, maybe where you're from, and then respond to one or more of these questions before you ask your own question. And that is, what do you think moves us toward a more peaceful world? Or what work are you most called to do? And then the last question I want to ask, and this is particularly relevant to me as I leave on sabbatical, is what do you do to sustain yourself when you're doing this work? Thanks for listening, guys.
Could you put those questions in the chat?
Sure thing. You can respond to, you can reply to all three, or you can reply to whichever one you're most moved to reply to.
Hey, Will, can I just note that there is already a question from Fern in the chat? You might want to start there.
Sure. Do you want to read it out?
Sure. If Putin surrenders, stops acting against NATO expansion, the US will quickly place a US puppet to control Russia. US imperialism, full spectrum US military dominance, oil, banks, and drug trading. How many countries have US appointed puppets dominating their nation's politics? Can you
Wow.
quote? There's a lot there. I'm not sure.
So Fern, can I ask you to unmute and respond to one of my other questions? Just because I want to make sure that we're I'm building in some time just to hear from the folks on the call too. If you're willing to unmute, if not, you can type pass or something.
Well, I'm a peace activist. It's really important to listen to you because I have a lot of feelings about the lies USA tells. You can't really trust USA. So how is Putin supposed to trust USA when in 1991 he was promised that NATO would not expand? And I also believe that Russia is protecting itself. Like, it's not really even about Russia, because if we take over Russia, then we'll take over China. Like, these things have been an ongoing process. I'm mostly involved in 9/11. My part started with Ralph Nader, and that's where I started. And it's difficult to say this, but I knew that it was not about winning. It was just about finding myself in this. So he was my first wonderful teacher, and he acted as a public citizen. And I don't see any answers. I just see a process. And what helps me is trying to stay connected with my own personal higher power. Thank you for letting me share.
Thank you, Fern. Thank you for adding that bit. Keeping yourself going is important. So I think you know that I can't answer at least the last part of that question. How many countries has the U.S. appointed puppets dominating their nation's politics? Because there's a spectrum of what is U.S. appointment and what is the selection from people who are allied with the U.S. A lot of it is covert. Sometimes, I think especially when you look at Central and South America, you see coups and you suspect the U.S. is probably backing them through the CIA based on who the coup is, but you can't prove it. And unfortunately, I don't know how many nations, governments the U.S. has been involved in toppling. We do know it's a lot. And we do know that it's interesting that my friend Mike's my friend Mike said to me when I was expressing some of the things that I said during the Ukraine portion of this talk. NATO has never attacked anyone. NATO is a peaceful military alliance that's defensive, and it was really hurtful to me in particular because I fought in Iraq, which, France was not one of the nations that did it, but that was essentially a NATO-led war. And it's an alliance of countries created to defend against Russia or maybe invade Russia, but it's an anti-Russian military alliance, right? Like that's NATO's purpose. You know, I don't think we can know what would happen. You know, and you certainly make a good point that the U.S. does not have a great track record of honoring our international agreements or international law. You know, you know, but I think that an offer of the security guarantees that Russia's been asking for is something that creates political space. You know, unfortunately, Fern, I don't have either a crystal ball or you know, the knowledge to really thoroughly answer your question. Just that these are ideas that I think should be present. You know, the idea that the U.S. has not followed international law. When Putin first invaded, Emmanuel Macron came on the TV and said, "This is blatantly illegal. Vladimir Putin needs to go to prison." And my first thought was, you know, this is coming from a man who is holding a huge nuclear arsenal, and huge, I mean, you know, 200 or 300 warheads that France has. But the Treaty on the Prohibition for Nuclear Weapons is an international treaty that is in force, meaning that under the UN Charter, nations are required to follow it. The United States has ratified that, meaning that it is supreme law of the land under our Constitution. And it is illegal to have nuclear weapons. It is blatantly illegal. There's no argument that having nuclear weapons or threatening to use nuclear weapons at this stage in the game is legal for any nation. So to have the nuclear powers saying to Putin, this is illegal and you should go to jail for it, it's like, well, you know, you don't have to follow international law. So you do raise you know, an interesting problem, which is the credibility of the United States being shot on the international stage, and you know, that a lot of our agreements aren't worth the paper they're written on because we have a tendency to break them. And I still think we need to try to create that space because I think it's the best shot the Ukrainians have. So thank you, Fern. I'm seeing a question from Bill in there, maybe?
Yes.
Yeah. So I wonder if it's time to draw the movement. You mind if I read it off, Amy? Or do you want to read it?
Go ahead, but Bill did just unmute, so he might be
Okay.
willing to answer the question, one of the
Go
other
ahead,
questions first.
Shall I read it? I'll read it in my voice.
All right.
So I wonder if it's time to draw closer to the movement working to end gun violence and look at putting pressure on those companies that spread death and destruction. I want to say right here in New Hampshire, BAE, Sig Sauer, Remington, Elbit Systems directly. Maggie and I were doing peacekeeping for the March for Our Lives in Nashua, and we just thought about the basic violence that the military-industrial complex and its gun-pushing members here in the United States do. At this brilliant event organized by 16 and 17-year-olds who were up on the stage and so angry and so emotional about what's going on. And like, we owe it to them. We have these companies right in our state who are making a killing, literally, and we should be challenging them more. And Maggie was suggesting an alliance of different organizations, like the people who are working on gun issues, the people working on peace, and other groups who would be a common alliance to put pressure on these companies, because it's disgusting. I mean, Sig Sauer, I just got a tweet that they are being sued because their guns keep on going off accidentally. These are the guns that we should have in our schools, and we should also have in our snowmobiles. So anyways, it's less of a question and more of a statement that, of something, an aspiration for the future.
All right, Bill, would you do us the honor of answering one or more of the three questions that I posed
Sure,
to?
I would. Get back to them. Well, I think what moves us towards a more peaceful world is really, I'd say personally, is kind of hope. We really don't have any other, if we stop believing in human beings being able to do this thing, then what's the point? Why are we here? So I think, you know, we have to draw hope from where I was very inspired by the movie the other night, The Boys That Said No, and remembering that that's the movement that radicalized me when I was a teenager. I wasn't young enough to quite be involved in that stuff, but it radicalized me. I went to the last anti-war rally of the Vietnam War when I was 16. So it was amazing to see the young people today, you know, that we had Emma and we had Michael talking about this continuity of the work that we do. And that's the hope that I have, that keeps me going.
Thank you, Bill. So to respond to your question, yes, you know, we you know, in the peace movement, we're in the position of, you know, most of our focus is on international relations, foreign policy. But actually, I'm going to move. You guys are probably all weirded out by my looking off to the side where your faces are. I had my notes in front of me and I didn't move my screen over. So we, you know, we put a lot of our energy and focus into focusing on foreign policy, but we're in a world where we're seeing, you know, American bombs being dropped on folks in Yemen or Palestine, or Pakistan, Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, all the many places that we've dropped bombs. And those lives not mattering. And at the same time, we're seeing American guns and American troops dropping bombs over there, American police gunning down black teenagers unarmed on the streets here. And to me, they're not different. And the culture of violence that, you know, that is supported by the weapons manufacturers is what is, you know, leading to our gun laws being what they are. I mean, I think all we're saying, you know, in the peace movement when it comes to gun control is can we just be like the rest of the world? You know, can we try to aim to not be the one country in the world where we have to deal with, you know, every so often just seeing, you know, large numbers of children dragged out in stretchers because their schools got shot up. It's a hard fight, but I do think, and you know, more to the point of your question, you know, should we be at these manufacturers? And I think, you know, when we look at some of the elder heroes of our movement, people we look up to, Macy Morse is who I'm thinking of in particular. You know, these are people who again and again put their lives on the line just to make sure to point that finger to those who are profiting from violence. Gun manufacturers and Pentagon contractors, you know, who are part of this this system that's defending itself of profiting from militarism and then having policy that pushes more militarism. And yeah, I mean, I've been, I think, you know, those of you who are on the board know that I have pushed back when there's been a suggestion that we should dip our toes into gun control because it's a minefield, and people are going to be opposed. But I can't push back right now. Like this, you know, after Uvalde, you know, like there's just no excuse for our gun laws to be where they are anymore. We need to have a real conversation about how we move forward in a way to keep our kids safe. There's no stepping around it anymore, and there's no so yes, what you're saying there, that this needs to be a part of our intersectional work. I mean, we've talked a lot about racism. We've talked a lot about how things intersect, and our gun culture is part of our war culture. It's part of our culture of violence. It is part of what we need to be doing, I think.
Thank you, Will.
Scott, go ahead. Sorry, I'm filling the role of, I'm so used to being host of these programs, Amy, that I'm stepping right on your toes every time.
No, it's okay, Will.
Go ahead, Scott.
Yeah. Will, thank you. Not only for tonight, of course, but for everything that you've done over the years. And your sabbatical is well-deserved, needless to say. God bless.
Thank you, Scott.
So I have a question that's off topic. Is that okay?
Go for it.
Um,
But you do have to respond to one of my 3 questions.
okay. I wrote them down. They're good questions. I like the one, your last one, what sustains you through this work? And it's certainly not hope. I'm in agreement with your conclusion. I don't think hope has anything to do with this. But another layer for me in this complex and oftentimes far too difficult world we inhabit, it's these kinds of connections with like-minded individuals. It's that connection that for me, from my heart, is reassuring, honestly, that we're not alone and on the right path. So to my question, it involves dark money, and I'm really looking for some advice. And in anticipation of, I just had an incident, sort of an unfortunate, I came into the unfortunate recognition that a peace-oriented organization, one of the good guys, has established a PAC. I think it's referred to as a PAC, essentially dark money. And when I heard this, I raised my hand, as I did tonight, and said, are we talking about dark money here? If I'm not mistaken, we're highly critical of the way these monies are raised and the way they're utilized, hearkening back to, what was it, Citizens United. I believe that set most of this into motion. And is that what we're talking about? And the response I got was, well, yeah, it's legal, and we're the good guys, and if we don't undertake, this kind of fundraising and expenditure, to candidates and the like, that we also feel are the good guys, then we're going to fall behind. And that gave me pause, quite frankly. And so my question to you, Will, and maybe, I'm going to put it out there. Is that a sufficient enough justification because we think we're the good guys?
What a hard question, Scott. I don't know. The reality that, part of running New Hampshire Peace Action for 12 years has been figuring out how to fund New Hampshire Peace Action for 12 years and finding money. And
I get
it. A mutual friend of ours, someone who we're both friends with, has a spouse who works for, I don't know, one of the big banks, and a bank that's heavily invested in nuclear weapons. And this friend said, I'd like to make a donation, and my husband's employer will match 5 to 1. Are you comfortable taking money from this bank? And my response to her was, I'd take money from Raytheon as long as I can do the work the way I want to do it. And I don't know that that's true. Working with banks is kind of something you have to do. And most banks are invested in fossil fuels, or invested in nuclear weapons, or invested in, Pentagon manufacturing is all we do. So banks are invested in Pentagon manufacturing. Dark money is, you don't know where that money's coming from. And there are times.
And you don't have to report it.
Yeah.
Right. There's no transparency. There's no accounting for it.
Right.
Yeah.
It's a hard question.
And it makes me shudder.
Yeah. Yeah. It would make me shudder in your shoes too. And I don't know. I don't know if, I do think that you should evaluate an organization around their messaging, around what they're saying, around what they're doing. And that it's important to know that money means power, money means direction most of the time.
Influence.
I will say that For all 12 years, New Hampshire Peace Action has had the same top donor. And to this day, I have no idea what that donor's favorite part of our work is, or why that donor, and that donor is extremely careful about never letting on what they think we should be doing. They're really, really careful about it. And that's wonderful for someone like me to feel that, so the problem isn't, I don't know where this money's coming from. The problem is, how is this money going to impact the direction of the organization? How is this money, and is this money being used to impact the direction of the organization? And if you believe in the mission and you know that it's morally right and that it is supporting your ethical directions, I would lean into letting it be. But I don't know that that's the right call, Scott. You have as much wisdom as I have, and I definitely, there are folks on the call who might have opinions, but for me, I think you can only really evaluate the organization by what they're doing, and you can only evaluate whether that money is clean or dirty on what that money is spent on. And if that money is spent to make the world a better place, do you need to know where it came from? Does it need to be accounted from? And that's for you to decide.
Yeah. This is, honestly, thank you for taking the question too. Obviously it's really troubled me, and I've been leaning into effectively how you're counseling me, vis-a-vis the objectives and the goals and aspirations, of the organization itself. And frankly, behind that, it's an old anecdote. Perfection is the enemy of the good, and we can't be so absolutist, as to, draw that line in the sand and expect all things to be binary in that regard, absolutely right or absolutely wrong. But you've given me some comfort, so I appreciate that. And if anybody else,
if anybody wants to weigh in, go for it.
Yeah. And if not, that's okay too.
If no one else, I'm going to call myself. If no one else is wanting to jump in there, and it's not particularly about what Scott just said, though it does. Tonight's conversation is a reminder to me about how there are no simple right answers, and how the conversation and the asking the right questions is sometimes more important, or certainly very important. There's that great Einstein quote that if he had a problem to solve in only an hour to solve it, he'd spend the first 59 minutes coming out with the right question. People know that. All right, so first, let me answer one of your questions. Will, what moves us toward a more peaceful world? I think there are many things. I think one of them is being more and more connected to each other, because I think both in order to do this kind of difficult work, we need a community. And also the more everyone is connected, the more we want to take care of each other. And I think that's really, really important. And part of what is, I think, especially helpful to me to know is that that's kind of what we're made to do. If you read the latest neuroscience and all these this whole line that really shows that one of the key aspects of our species is our wish to connect with each other. So there's a lot that's pushing us away from that, but if that's who we really are, I think if we have enough time, we will get there. It's just a question of keeping us from destroying ourselves before we can get there. So here we are. And my question is, I'm going to say some things, and I'd like your thoughts on them, Will. And it's somewhat connected to some of what Fern has talked about. You know, I have a really strong like reaction to what feels to me like hypocrisy. Okay. And I get the world is filled with contradictions and nothing is pure and nothing is perfect and all that. But when I see like this country calling on Putin to go to the International Criminal Court, where pretty much every president we've had in my lifetime should have gone to, and which we won't even support, you know, that level of sort of dissonance is very hard for me to remain calm through. Let's see, which I try to do, you know, because again, connecting rather than screaming at each other, I think is what leads us in a better direction. But what I keep like not getting is why, you know, how so many people are sort of making these like how people can be so outraged about Ukraine, Russia, but have no reaction to Yemen. And to me, the situation is so similar. I mean, Saudi Arabia is this extremely powerful neighbor. And Yemen had some stuff going on that was, there was conflict going on there. And they said, well, that scared stepped in. And it's turned into kind of a product. And in that case, we are unabashedly, completely, without us, Saudi Arabia couldn't even do it, right? So this sort of level of cognitive dissonance, do you have thoughts on that, Will? And how we can help people step away from that? Again, it's a huge topic, I know, but I'd love.
No, yeah. I mean, isn't that the pain that those of us who've been working on peace for a long time, isn't that at the core of the pain of this moment for us? That, like we've been, I mean, you have been working at this since before I was, you've been engaged in this work for decades, trying to defend the children of places like Yemen and Iraq and Afghanistan and Central and South America, and trying to protect them from American weapons and American soldiers, sometimes American soldiers, sometimes other soldiers who were funded and armed and trained by the U.S. In vast numbers of innocent children who have been killed by American weaponry over the years, and screaming it to a people who have been numb to it and disinterested. This conflict, and it is awful. It's horrible. What we're seeing on the news is true. Like, this should not be happening, and the people responsible should go to prison, and the war should be ended. But we've been, this is just a Tuesday to us, right? Like, the only difference is that these kids are white and it's not American weapons and American soldiers, right? And it's at the core of what we're saying, that to hold every child's life equally and protect them is our responsibility as a society, as a species, right? Like, that this is where we need to go. And for us, it's at the core of the pain of this moment that people care so much about what's happening there, where we have so little real ability to change things, and they've cared so little about the deaths of in most recent years, it is Yemen, this cholera epidemic, starvation, that you and I have been trying to call attention to as loudly as we can, trying to get people to pay attention to, and they prefer to live their lives as usual because the system is designed to not show them that, not tell them that, and our society doesn't want that to be in the limelight. it's at the core of what we're hoping to bring out of this, right? Like that if we can see it in Ukraine, can we continue to see it in Yemen and whatever country the US attacks next, or whatever country the US funds a coup in next? You know, can we take this care and do something with it? And I can't speak to how we fix it, but I can speak to the reality that I feel that with you, that it, you know, that one of the things I feel around it is shame in what it means to be an American or a member of this society, that that people can ignore that suffering and can go about their daily lives, and then when it's presented to them in a light where it doesn't conflict with the narrative that supports their being able to live a normal, happy life, they can feel that rage the way we have for years, and that it can take and hold their hearts the way that the children of Yemen have held our hearts, and that that there's a vast swirl of emotions around that. And for me, I always have this image of this Iraqi kid who I used to see outside of LSA Anaconda, and it would be like 100 to 120 degrees, and this kid would be almost every day, he'd be there, and he had 2-liter bottles taped to his feet to protect his feet from the sand, and that was the only thing he was wearing. And he'd be there hoping that American soldiers would throw MREs and food, and that was how he survived from the food that we were throwing. And he didn't have clothes. He had 2-liter bottles taped to his feet to protect them from the burning sand. And that kid is as human as the kids with the teddy bears that we see on MSNBC today. And that is and it's at the core of why I need a break, that we're, and it's just hard. It's just hard that people care so much, and that people have cared so little. I'm sorry, I don't have anything positive to say, but
actually,
just to be in community with you, that I know, that I feel.
Well, and I do think it because it's the sort of double-edged sword. The fact that we see that people do have this ability to care this much, is actually, not a bad thing.
Right.
It's
but
just
it hurts.
But yeah, and this whole trying to open people up, widen their circle of compassion, widen their understanding of the world, and the part that we play, because our complicity isn't just shameful. It means we have power, and if we can take it in, we can make more changes in people in so many other places, and
That's it. Right there. We have power. We do. And I think we can bring that power forward in this moment. I hope we can.
I see a hand.
Go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Amy. Paul Krautman from Keene. Gosh, Will, I didn't realize you were at LSA Anaconda at the same time I was, and someday we should talk about it.
Oh, no way. That's wild.
Anyway. I think your last question is, I can't see it now, but I think that the reason that I keep doing what I do, and those of us in Keene who meet every Saturday morning, is, and I'm not being proud. I'm not subjecting myself to the sin of pride, but we know we're right. We know that what we're doing is the right thing to do, and whether or not we, darn it, we're going to keep on doing it. I was part of a little thing that my wife Susie was with a group of high school friends on a Zoom call the other day, and one of the Lib Dems from Cape Cod asked me, about funding Ukraine. And I said the same thing I said last Sunday at the peace action thing at Bear Brook. If I were a US Senator, I would have voted against it. Well, how can you stand to blah, blah, blah? And my reaction was, you know, it's about time Germany, France, and England or somebody else funds this kind of stuff. I think I'm tired of the United States $813 billion plus what, $40 billion a couple of weeks ago. I'm tired of the United States. I'm tired of me funding more war. And she didn't get it, but I'm going to keep trying. So anyway, that's what I have. That's what I have to throw out there. And thanks, Will, for what you have done, and everybody else here. We are right, and we can't stop. We can't stop fighting this fight for peace. Will said it a little bit. One of his quotes is "fighting for peace because the fight is right." That's paraphrasing something that Will said, but gosh darn it, we just can't stop trying.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
it.
Thank you, Paul.
Thanks, Paul.
That's
Yeah.
beautiful. And we are getting to that. Do you want to say I'm going to start ending here, but Will, I don't want to interrupt you.
You weren't. I was just going to agree with Paul. But I do want to say thank you all. You know, and you know, I'm so grateful for the opportunity to rest, and I do need it. You know, I wouldn't have asked for it if I didn't. I know I need some time to sit, and you know, I deeply appreciate those of you who are willing to come out and chat with me tonight. And you know, I did go a little further than I usually do when talking about the Russia stuff. It's just, I figured this was my chance to talk about it. That for years we've had speakers on Russia who have said this is a problem. This is not going to be, you know, this is an unacceptable security circumstance for Russia, and we tried to stop this from happening. And I think that you know, whether it's pretext or whether it's a legitimate security concern, you know, this you know, the expansion of NATO and the threat to Russian security was a necessary ingredient for this to happen, and someone's got to say it. So I'm going to say it, and then I'm going to run away for 3 months so that people can be mad into the void.
Well, Willa, I do appreciate your saying it, and I know that you feel out on a limb, and I totally get that. I actually had a op-ed appear in the paper down here this weekend, and I'm already getting the angry messages. So it is one of those times. To me, frankly, it feels not unlike peace vigils that we did after September 11th, 2001, and the amount of fury sent our way at that point. So you'd think I'd be used to it, but it is tough. It is tough. So folks, thank you all for being here. As you know, Will is going on sabbatical for the summer, but New Hampshire Peace Action is still going to be here, including quite a few online events. And let me just give you a little bit of an upcoming window into those. So on Monday, June 20th, 7 to 8 p.m. It's our next Peace and Justice conversation series on Zoom, and it's about the selling of war, specifically about the role of media and education in convincing us to accept war, something that has stood out to some of us recently. Dr. Leo Sandy will be presenting then. Then we're actually taking July 4th off. On Monday, July 18th from 7 to 8, we're going to view a talk and then discuss the really amazing work that Erica Chenoweth has been doing, the research in which she's showing the success of nonviolent campaigns, that in fact, nonviolent campaigns are more successful than violent ones at achieving revolutionary change. If you haven't heard her work, I really recommend it. Monday, August 1st from 7 to 8, the topic is going to be Iran and the nuclear program and Biden's stance on it and where we're going with that. So that came up a little bit tonight, and we'll go into it a lot more detail Monday, August 1st. So stay in touch with us, nhpeaceaction.org. Our events will be up there, and we also have a Facebook page you can go to keep up with us. I'll also say that this event, as most of them are, was free. We want to include everyone. We also always welcome your support. And I'm going to put into the chat both our events page and our donation page so that you, if you want to follow up with either or both of those, you can. And with all that said, again, I just thank Will, thank all of you, and I hope for all of us some nice summertime, and that we get some of our assignments going, and maybe we can have a report back to Will that will cheer him up on his return, right? We'll see.
You get Pappas on that Yemen War Powers resolution,
Yes,
and I'll be pretty satisfied.
And I did put into the chat the link to sign up for the action call day. We're working a lot with FCNL on this. It's absolutely going to be a huge focus the next month or more. So yeah, stay connected with us. Please help us with this. It is one of those moments that don't always come along where we can really make a difference. And it's just going to be like a few extra phone calls here or there that are going to make a huge difference for a lot of people in the world. So that is exciting. And I hope that you feel that excitement about being able to join in. And I don't think even any of us are going to have to like go to jail or, pay a lot of money. This is going to be a pretty easy ask as these things go. For those of you who watched The Boys Who Said No, we aren't going to have to do as much to get as much done in this case. So join us. And thank you. Good night.